All right. Now what about this actual mesh on the top of the shoe? How was this done? Well, this is actually a little bit more simple. I'll break down the process for you. What I basically did here is I just drew a rectangle around this area. Okay, so that's the area that has most of that mesh in it. And I made sure that the fill is white. And then I added a pattern to it. So if I go into my swatches, I poked around by dropping this down, Open Swatches Library. I poked around in the patterns for a while until I found a pattern that works. And actually, I'm just going to go show you because it's different. So if I go to Decorative Legacy, this pattern right here called Knit Color works pretty well. It looks very close, very similar to the knit pattern that I have in that shoe. Except A, it's too big, and B, it's the wrong color. Well, that's no problem. After I've used it for a fill, it shows up in my swatches, which is great as a copy. So then I can double click that. And when I do it, it opens up that pattern options. And then I can just go about selecting very carefully all of those little paths that make that up. So all those are selected. And then I'm just going to change the fill and the stroke. I want the fill to be a solid black. And I think it's going to look good if the stroke is a lighter gray, maybe a middle gray. So then it has that pattern of black knit with a gray highlight around the edge. And if I click on done, then it changes it. And of course I can transform it by selecting it, Object Transform, and scale it by scaling only the pattern. Okay. So it says, hey, what do you want to do? I don't want to transform the objects, just the patterns. And I want to scale it maybe down to 25%. It looks pretty good. And say, okay, now that I have that, I need this shape of the area in order to create an envelope distort. And no worries, I already have that. I created it right here. So to save time right now in this tutorial, I am going to just use that shape by going to Edit, Copy, and then Edit, Paste in Place. And now I have that again to use in this layer. So there that is. It's just a shape. And there's the rectangle that's filled with the pattern that I want. I select those two together, and I go to Object, Envelope Distort, and under Envelope Options, I want to make sure that my Distort Pattern Fills is checked. I say OK. Then I go back to Object, Envelope Distort, and there's three different options. I can make it with a warp, a mesh, or a top object. In this case, I want the top object. And there, it's warped it to the estimated shape of that object. And it's done a pretty good job. You can see it curves around. It tries to follow those contoured edges. It does a pretty good job of showing the shape of that shoe. And then the last thing I'll have to do is once again create a gradient mesh that will match the highlights and shadows that are underneath. And the final result ends up looking like this. So you can see there's the gradient mesh. Let me go ahead and turn off that shoe so you can see there's the gradient mesh, and I use different blending modes to blend it with the envelope distort I did. Well, I hope that those techniques can help you troubleshoot and brainstorm ideas about how to create photorealistic effects with some complicated objects such as a shoe. It's not always about one effect or one technique. It's about combining the various tools that you know how to use in Illustrator to create the effect you want to use. All right, enjoy your journey.